Good morning, everyone. Welcome to the First Unitarian Society of Milwaukee's online worship service. I'm Reverend Dina McFeeters, and I'm honored to serve as Associate Minister. We welcome people of all genders, sexualities, ages, races, ethnicities, histories, and bodies. We welcome your mind, your heart, and your spirit. We welcome all that you are carrying with you today and all that your heart longs to set down. We'd like to pay a special welcome to visitors and guests joining us today. If you're visiting for the first time or just joining us from afar, why don't you say hello in the chat and tell us where you're joining us from? I'm delighted to introduce our pulpit guests. First Church member Katie Phillips and staff member Lynn Jacoby, who will be speaking on the topic Poetry and the Art of Living. Katie Phillips has been a member of our congregation for 10 years. After years of searching, she is now home. It took her a while to find poetry too. Busy as a wife, mother, grandmother, and teacher, writing poetry came as a surprise later in life and has been a joy ever since. Lynn Jacoby is the Membership Development Coordinator at First Church. She's been a Unitarian Universalist for 25 years and came to Milwaukee from New England. She is happy reading poetry, watching the Packers, and walking her dog Posey, though not all at the same time. Katie and Lynn, it's great to have you in our virtual pulpit. Finally, I welcome everyone to our worship service by inviting you to repeat our mission after me. We gather to nurture the spirit, engage the mind, and inspire action.
Good morning. Katie and I wanted to bring you a service that honored poetry. Not just the poetry of words, though, but the poetry of our lives. The poetry of late summer and the poetry of disappointment. The poetry of walking in the rain and the poetry of loss that aches. Of course, the poetry of laughter and quiet ponds. The poetry that is and moves in our days and reaches within and among and beyond us. The love that holds all as sacred. And the poetry that gives us these words from Mary Oliver.
It doesn't have to be the blue iris. It could be words in a vacant lot or a few small stones. Just pay attention. Then patch a few words together and don't try to make them elaborate. This isn't a contest, but the doorway into thanks and a silence in which another voice may speak.
Going into the silent meditation portion of our services, we're going to share a part of the practice we have been doing Wednesday mornings by reading the same Raymond Carver poem twice. For the first reading, we'll listen just for a word or a short phrase that resonates with us the most. Don't worry about what the poem means or anything. Just listen for that word that resonates for you. After the poem, share your word if you're willing, that by typing it into the live chat. Of course, if you are part of our poetry group out there listening, I more than invite you to share your word. I expect you to share the word by typing it in the live chat. Finally, for this practice, I find it really helpful to close my eyes as I'm listening to the poem each time. So I invite you to do that as well if you're willing. Happiness by Raymond Carver. So early, it's still almost dark out. I'm near the window with coffee and the usual early morning stuff that passes for thought when I see a boy and his friend walking up the road to deliver the newspaper. They wear caps and sweaters, and one boy has a bag over his shoulder. They are so happy they aren't saying anything, these boys. I think if they could, they would take each other's arm. It's early in the morning, and they are doing this thing together. They come on slowly. The sky is taking on light, though the moon still hangs pale over the water. Such beauty that for a minute death and ambition, even love, doesn't enter into this. Happiness. It comes on unexpectedly and goes beyond, really, any early morning talk about it. As Katie reads the poem for a second time, we're listening for a feeling that is coming up for us. And this time I invite you to follow that feeling wherever it may lead into the 2 minutes of silent meditation that will follow.
Happiness. So early, it's still almost dark out. I'm near the window with coffee and the usual early morning stuff that passes for thought. When I see a boy and his friend walking up the road to deliver the newspaper, they wear caps and sweaters. One boy has a bag over his shoulder. They are so happy, and they aren't saying anything, these boys. I think if they could, they would take each other's arm. It's early in the morning, this thing they are doing together. They come on slowly. The sky is taking on light, though the moon still hangs pale over the water. Such beauty that for a minute death and ambition, even love, doesn't enter into this. Happiness. It comes on unexpectedly and goes beyond, really, any early morning talk of it.
Hi, I'm Caitlin, one of the co-facilitators of the Poetry Contemplation Group, and Lynn asked me to tell my story about the group. Poetry was what led me to UU. I had recently moved to the Milwaukee East Side and was desiring to find a community where I felt comfortable and could explore my love for poetry. After a quick Google search, I found the poetry group at UU. I was amazed at the connection I felt with those in the group and the new insights and perspectives I gained from everyone. Being a part of the poetry group has been powerful for me because it has led me to grow spiritually and helped me to develop my leadership skills. Being a co-facilitator has led me to dive deep into poetry. It has exposed me to poets I never would have come across if I was not exploring poetry in order to find a meaningful poem for the group. As the person picking the poem for the group, I was reading poetry from a new perspective. I was reading less from a place of judgment of how it was written or trying to find the true meaning of the poem. I was listening more to how the poem made me feel. When I brought a poem to the group and felt others being uplifted and changed from the poem, it felt very rewarding. Picking a poem gave me a sense of creativity and gratitude for the beauty humanity can create through words. I felt excited thinking about the potential vast array of emotions the poem would elicit from the members of the group. For me, poetry is synonymous with my connection to God, spirits, higher power, and for lack of a specific word, the life force that breathes energy into the world. The lockdown was a time of isolation and the potential to lose connection to those close to you and acquaintances. This poetry group has been my weekly dose of connecting to my deepest self and the beauty of those in the UU community.
Today I met 500 crows crowded in the trees in my front yard. On the bare branches they looked like leaves flying around. I was amazed. It sounded like a crow convention, like something big was going down. Some kind of argument, or maybe they were singing. So I closed my eyes to better hear the crow chorus, to see if I could catch the beauty in their sound. Oh, they were singing out loud, such a clear and pure emotion. I felt moved, not even knowing what their music was about. I am part heartache, I am part joyful child. I am a grown-up that's still growing up. miles now. Don't want to wait until I die. Today I met 500 crows.
Poetry and the art of living. Poetry and actually living daily life. Honestly, do we really pay attention to this connection? Maybe not on most days, but some of you can relate to what happened to me one day. My late husband Jim and I had moved downtown. Life was upended. Not bad, but not familiar. One Sunday morning, I was taking a walk by myself when suddenly I heard a flock of geese, heard them first, then saw them in a V skimming over the tops of trees. I stopped and looked up. Across from me, another woman did the same thing. After the geese passed out of view, she looked at me and said, "You need not be good," which might seem an unusual remark to make to a stranger, but wasn't at all. It came from a Mary Oliver poem, Wild Geese. I knew the poem. So did that woman. We did not stop to talk, just nodded at each other in recognition and continued on our way. When I went home, I looked up the ending. Whoever you are, no matter how lonely, the world offers itself to your imagination, calls to you like the wild geese, harsh and exciting over and over, announcing your place in the family of things. That stranger's word led me to find the rest of Oliver's poem and to the comfort I did not even know I needed. None of us expected to live through what we have experienced in the past year and a half. We still have trouble finding words for the fear and grief and anger we felt during those months of pandemic, racial injustice, political chaos, and an emotional election that left us all battered and bruised. We were personally isolated. We felt fractured on so many levels. Thank God for poets, wrote Margaret Rendell in the New York Times. Thank God for our poets who, in the mildness of spring and winter storms alike, help us find words our tongues feel too swollen to speak. For a poet appeared to us, Amanda Gordon in her bright yellow coat. It was Inauguration Day. We had all recently witnessed an uprising in our nation's capital. We needed to find a hope we could hold in our hands. And when Gorman stood before us on that cold, sunny day, she spoke the words we were too exhausted to say, but needed so badly to hear. When day comes, we ask ourselves, where can we find light in this never-ending shade? And yet the dawn is ours before we knew it. Somehow we do it. Somehow we weathered and witnessed. And so we lift our gaze not to what stands between us, but what stands before us. For even as we grieved, we grew. Even as we hurt, we hoped. Even as we tired, we tried. The new dawn balloons as we free it, and there is always light. If only we're brave enough to see it. If only we're brave enough to be it. Gorman knew where we were, offering us comfort while challenging us to be part of the change. We knew what was happening all around us. She was there when we needed her. That was almost 6 months ago. We still need these words, for we're living what people call a new normal, which does not feel normal at all. As individuals, communities, and nations, we are looking for words that comfort, strengthen our resolve, and give us courage to face the issues that are now part of our lives. We might need poetry more than we ever have before. The poet Czesław Miłosz says, "The purpose of poetry is to remind us how difficult it is to remain just one person. For our house is open. There are no keys to the doors, and invisible guests come in and out at will." Poetry, a house with open doors, everyone welcomed. That sounds much like the community at First Church, which leads me to a story about exactly that. As Mary Oliver writes in the poem Hurricane, listen to what happened. What happened in March when the physical doors of our church did close because of the pandemic, and then opened again as we learned how to be church in a whole new way. Sunday morning services on Zoom, breakout groups, meetings, and one particular group that had met in the summer months for a practice of poetry and contemplation. When the pandemic changed everything, this group changed too. The practice remained the same, but more of us came together and we gathered on Zoom. That was more than a year ago. Our meditation this morning gave you a little experience of what we do in this practice of reading in response. It's nothing new, but based on a monastic practice begun in the 3rd century called Lectio Divina. The monks use scriptures from the Bible. In our gatherings, the readings are poetry. Why poetry, you might ask? In her book, 9 Gates, Entering the Mind of Poetry, Jane Hirshfield answers, "We peer into a new poem with the old hope that we might find a few words to illumine more widely our passage through the dark woods and brightly lit cities of this fleeting, time-bound world, to feel joined to some fabric that both gives meaning to and is made meaningful by the part of it we are." This is how it goes. Lynn, or one of the leaders, lights the candle. We enter into a silence. The chosen poem is read. We listen and say out loud one word that resonates to us personally. The poem is read a second time by another reader. This time we respond, as we did this morning, with a feeling the poem's message evokes. And then we read it for a third time, in a third voice, and show what the poem moves us to do in our lives. There is silence in the practice and listening. We speak from the heart, not analyzing what the poet wrote. Jane Hirshfield adds to this, in the wholeheartedness of concentration, world and self begin to cohere. With that state comes an enlarging of what is known, may be felt, and what may be done. Word, feeling, action. And those who have met in our poetry and contemplation group online for more than a year know the truth of these words. We ask the members to share their experience of what happened over the past year, and this is what some of them said. The poems remind us of what we have in common as humans. Being in a community is so important. It's almost magical how it deepens the poem and our response to it. The poems chosen have a remarkable power to bring into focus an aspect of my own life, as well as the universality of our seemingly private joys and sorrows and awakenings. Hearing the poem read by 3 different voices each morning is important and opens me up to more possibilities than I could ever have imagined. Amanda Gordon speaking to a nation, me on the sidewalk, hearing Mary Oliver's Geese and nodding to a woman I never met. Such are the ways that poetry can enter our everyday lives. But I have been talking about more, or in addition, poetry responded to as a community. Another of our group echoed that thought when she said, after almost every session with the group, I have thought this poem, this contemplation, this discussion, this group is just what I needed today. So that is what happened and keeps happening every Wednesday. The poem and the people who show up in contemplation share how that poem lands in their lives that day and speaks to their condition at that moment. Poems responded to in a community and in the midst of the pandemic, and now nourish us, bringing meaning and courage to our lives, and show us how poetry can indeed enrich the art of living. And now Lynn will continue the story.
We think in words, most of us. But for me, there are certain words strung together in certain ways that cling deeper than thoughts. So they'll rise up in my consciousness at totally random moments. Maybe some of you, it is a tune that pops into your head for no known reason, or an image, or the need to bust out suddenly into a dance move. But for me, it's lines of poetry like Dickinson's "How dreary to be someone, how public like a fraud," or Coolidge's "Getting and spending we lay waste our power," Cummings' "When the world is puddle wonderful and the little lame balloon man whistles far and near." Most of these lines have resided within so long I don't remember when I first read them. But I do have a new one from this past year's poetry group, Sonia Sanchez's "This is not a small voice you hear." I don't know why certain lines seem to take up residence when so many have not, but I do know it is not because of what I think about them. I still have no idea, for example, what to think about a goat-footed balloon man whistling. But I do believe this is the power of poetry. It uses the tools we think in, words, to touch something deeper in us. And we do think in words, most of us. What is more, as the field of linguistics is proving again and again, the words we think in also shape what we think, how we view our world, how we experience it, even how we act in it. From the names we give one another to whether or not a particular language has future tense verbs, our words influence our behavior, how we treat one another, how well we can save money. In the beginning, there was the Word according to the Gospel of John, and the Word was with God, and the Word was God. And just, for example, look at the front lines of the cultural war raging in our country right now, and how often those battles are centered around what words we should use and what words we should not use. It seems we all understand the power of words to shape our collective thinking, to create different realities. And yet, our poets and our Unitarian Transcendentalist ancestors would say words, as powerful as they are not foremost. Experiences, poets, or at least the ones I've happened to encounter explaining the process of writing, never start with words. They don't even start with thoughts. They talk about inspiration as a feeling or an intuition, an experience or a gift. Poet Ruth Stone describes feeling poems approaching like a thunderous train of air barreling down at her. So she would have to run like hell to get pen and paper just to catch the poem in time. Or, as she put it, the poem would barrel right through her and go find another go find another poet. A little more prosaically, poet Denise Levertov writes, first there must be an experience, a sequence, or a constellation of perceptions felt by the poet, felt intensely enough to demand their equivalence in words. And only then does the poet begin the task of exploring that moment, of finding the words in which the heat of feeling warms the intellect. Or as Mary Oliver describes poetry, as not words after all, but fires for the cold, ropes let down to the lost, something as necessary as bread in the pockets of the hungry. Indeed, I would guess that all of us at some moment have been given words in such a way that they have softened a sorrow or lit hope within or soothed some deep yearning. Words from a song maybe, or movie dialogue, or creative essay, maybe even a sermon. Words that brought feeling along with thought. This, I think, is the great gift of poems, and the gift that gave our poetry contemplation group so much these past 18 months, because poems in eliciting feeling can also contain them, hold emotions for us safely. And as we found out in our group, this might be especially true when we engage with poetry in community. For our Unitarian Transcendentalist forefather, Ralph Waldo Emerson, though, the importance of poetry is more than its ability to hold our human experience for us. It also has a prophetic power to articulate new experiences. Emerson's understanding that truth is continuously unfolding is an important tenet in our Unitarian Universalist faith still today. But as Emerson saw it, it wasn't just truth that continuously unfolded, the human experience itself also continues to unfold. Our poets, he contended, are the first to step forward from what was and into what is. And then they help usher the rest of us into the new reality. Every thought, Emerson wrote, is also a prison. Every heaven is also a prison. Therefore, we love the poet, the inventor, who in any form has yielded us a new thought. He unlocks our chains and admits us into a new scene. For the experiences of each age, Emerson continues, requires new confession, and the world seems always to be waiting for its poet. Pulitzer Prize-winning novelist Marilyn Robinson said something similar in an interview when she was apologizing for the mystical language she used in describing her own poetry, her own process of writing. I'm sorry, she said, but it is true, and I want to say it because it is so important to me for people to realize they are much larger and more complex and more consequential entities than most cultures allow them to believe. I want to tell you about an Alice Walker poem that, with a simple metaphor, opened for me a little bit of a prison. You see, when I came out to myself as gay years after adolescence, it was thrilling and confusing and a relief, sure, but also a piece of it was really unnerving. It wigged me out that I could hide such a large part of myself from myself all those years. I mean, it was a little humorous to realize I finally had some empathy for my twin sister's high school weirdness 10 years later, when suddenly I was acting just as goofy about women. But it was scary too, remembering thinking in high school, throughout college, and beyond, I thought I was totally cool with homosexuality, that I accepted gays. Apparently, not as long as they were not me. So it made me nervous about what else I was lying to myself about when I came across this poem by Alice Walker. At first, it is true, I thought there were only peaches and wild grapes. To my delight, I have found myself born into a garden of many fruits. At first, it is true, I thought there were only peaches and wild grapes, that watermelon, lush, refreshing, completed my range. But now, child, I can tell you, there is such a creature as the wavy green cherimoya, the black, loud-smelling and delicious duran, the fleshy orange mango, and the spiky, white-hearted soursop. In my garden, imagine. At first, I thought I could live on blue plums, that fresh yellow pears might become my sole delight. I was naive, child. Infinite is the garden of many fruits. I, myself, spread out to cover the earth, savoring each and every one, date, fig, persimmon, and passion fruit. I am everywhere, at home. For some reason, Walker's self-accepting but so gentle, I was naive child, held me just right. And also her in my garden, imagine, invited me to be curious rather than anxious about what I have yet to know about myself, about my world, about others' experiences in the world that are different than mine. To this day, I think of this poem often, and especially in the context of the anti-racism work we are attempting to do in this church, or in the courageous welcome we want to extend. When we do not know what that might look like or feel like, it's okay. We're all naive. And how can we not be limited by our language, our thoughts, our cultures? But it is also true, there are Wednesday mornings, and I'll find myself sensing an infinite garden of new possibilities, experiences, truths unfolding in the poems we read, and also in the feeling and the stories and the insights of my fellow participants when they share their responses to those poems. I actually get this feeling quite often in many places in this beloved community of ours. Some feeling warms my intellect into an experience of expansiveness, connection, spirit, soul. I don't know, some creative force beyond really any early morning talk about it, perhaps, but present nonetheless, here with you all and within. May it always be so.
Thank you all so much for your generosity. Pledges are the core of our church's spiritual practice of generosity. We are also grateful for additional gifts to support our ministry and thank the folks out there who are appreciating this online ministry and supporting it by texting 73256 with the message "Give to UU," or by giving on our website. Your gifts help us continue to provide this ministry. We also share the plate with an organization each month. The nonprofit Nehemiah Project is our summer Share the Plate recipient. With 2 facilities in Milwaukee, the Nehemiah Project works with teens and young men, 13 to 20 years old, who have served their sentence and are preparing to return to their families. Its mission is to promote the physical and emotional well-being of youth through psychological, educational, leadership, and transitional living services in a residential community. They accept clothing items, furniture, financial donations, and offer volunteer opportunities. To make a donation directly to the Nehemiah Project, please visit their website. They also accept donations over the phone. You can see all these options on your screen now, and they will live on in the YouTube comments section of this video after worship is over. Thank you so much for giving, right now, or when you come back later. Your support keeps us and our community partners going. Thank you.
Lynn and I want to close with a wide invitation to anyone watching. Come and try the Poetry Contemplation Group. It is open to visitors and guests and members, whatever your previous experience with poetry, wherever you are in the country. We meet at 9:00 a.m. Central Time every Wednesday and are completely drop-in. Come once, come as often as you like. The link to receive the Zoom room address for the group can be found under Events on our website or in the live chat right now.
We also invite those to whom other art forms resonate perhaps more deeply than poetry to be curious. Are there ways to explore your own responses to that art form? Is there a way to engage with it in community? I'm open to ideas. After all, as Alice Walker reminds us, infinite is our garden of many fruits. May we continue to seek new ways to savor each and every one. May we go forth into the world, seeking to become everywhere at home.
We are going, heaven knows where we are going. We know within, and we will get there. Heaven knows how we will get there, but we know we will. Whoa, yeah, yeah. Whoa, yeah, yeah. Whoa, yeah, yeah. Whoa, yeah, yeah.